there's like a lot of Madonna horror complex stuff going on in this one. Hello, welcome to Books and Booze. This is a series where I talk about books and I have some booze. I'm Alex. This time I will be talking about Flannery O'Connor's novel Wise Blood, which is one of my all-time favorites. I have reread it recently and I wanted to talk about it on here. I'll also be sipping on some red wine, some Sicilian Rosso, I believe is how you say it. It's a overall red wine blend, maybe? I don't know a whole lot about this, was just craving some red wine, and this looked pretty good, so let's crack into it. Alright, cheers to Flannery O'Connor and her novel Wise Blood. That certainly is dry, but it's actually surprisingly sweet to me. I think when people think of more like jammy wines and like that actual like black grape flavor, this particular one called Seven Sicilians, Dorso that's kind of what's hitting it for me, so it's perfect. Exactly what I've been craving right now. It doesn't really fit into the novel in any way, like we sometimes do, but there's probably some kind of communion joke you can make in the comments below. If you come up with one, let me know. So anyways, let's get into it. Wise Blood is Flannery O'Connor's debut novel, which was published in 1952. The story revolves around this young man named Hazel Motes, who's from this rural southern background. After he is returning from World War II, he decides to reject his Christian upbringing, and he's moving into this small Tennessee city where he establishes the Church Without Christ and encounters this various range of very eccentric characters during this crusade he is leading. The novel delves into themes of faith, redemption, and the struggle between belief and skepticism. O'Connor's dark humor and grotesque Southern Gothic style infuse the entire narrative, and it creates this really vivid yet often unsettling atmosphere. And Hazel's journey overall is marked by these interactions he has with different characters, such as Isa Hawks, who's this blind street preacher, and his daughter Sabbath, Lily, who goes on this quest to seduce Motes, and Enoch Emery, I go with Enoch, it seems more accurate to me, who's this other lonely young man in this city who gets fixated on Motes, but also this mummy at a local museum. It gets really weird. And as the story unfolds, Hazel's efforts to distance himself from his religious past lead him to acts of extreme punishment and a very paradoxical form of faith that takes center stage in the novel. I've alluded to before that Flannery O'Connor is my favorite writer, and you're probably somewhat aware of her presence as a literary figure, but if you don't know, she was a very prominent American writer, known for the Southern Gothic fiction that she kind of led the charge with. She didn't necessarily make it, but she kind of took ownership over that as a term. She began writing Wise Blood in 1947 while studying at the Iowa Writers' Workshop, and it was mainly done by 1948, but went through various significant revisions until its publication in 1952. During this period, O'Connor's own life was marked by a lot of radical and significant changes. In 1950, she was diagnosed with lupus, which is the same disease that killed her father. This diagnosis led her to actually also return to her rural southern roots in Milledgeville, Georgia, where she then would remain the rest of her life. And despite her illness, she continued to work on Wise Blood and many other writings that I just adore. And this novel really kind of reflects her deep Catholic faith and her experiences with the American South and all these themes that would become central to the rest of her work. So the process of her writing Wise Blood kind of coincides with her developing her literary voice, which is always centered on religious themes, a lot of wit, and a lot of times very gross and grotesque, dark characteristics of humankind. And O'Connor wrote this just when she was 27 years old. And that's just to say, I'm pretty jealous. I wish I could have written something this immaculate at that young of an age. But anyway, let's start talking about the book. This is usually a time where I talk about maybe like criticisms or something I think the work lacks. I don't have that here. This is one of my all-time favorites. I already mentioned that before, so this is going to be more analytical and me kind of gushing over how great this work is and why you should read it, and probably have some spoilers throughout, but let's just get into it. One of the main things that on this reread of Wise Blood that really struck me was this sense of ambiguity all throughout it, and O'Connor has that in a lot of her work. These characters are so real in one way, yet somehow they're very fantastical at the same time. They make sense to you, you know people like them, but also you know no one liked them at the same time. And despite this, each character sort of wears their ideals on their sleeve. Like, no one really is pulling one on who they are. They're incredibly rich in just a short amount of time on the pages. The sense of ambiguity about these characters, who they truly are in their lives, feeds into the central themes of the novel. Namely, that faith is inevitable when one is open to it in any kind of regard. Motes claims he only wants the truth. And in a contorted way over the course of the novel, he gets it while striving to reject it at the same time. By rejecting it, he's only giving the truth more power over him. His outright rejection is actually what continuously feeds him stumbling into it over and over and over. In one noticeable moment, a man confesses to Motes, making it clear that, despite Motes making it clear that he doesn't want to be seen as a priest, this man ends up confessing to him anyway. He exposes how a more lax approach to faith might result in someone running a scam, as many try to do alongside him. He performs a testament of blind faith while trying to avoid becoming a beacon of just that toward the conclusion of the novel. And he's disciplined in all this to the degree that he's just so insanely unlikable and vile at times. And O'Connor often uses that to a very humorous effect, at times kind of describing Motes as very young, yet he's also very skeletal and kind of has this death imagery around him the whole time. And that makes this funny sense of ambiguity again, where Motes has this sense that he wants to refuse being seen, at least truly seen for who he is, but he can't get enough attention through his street preaching. But he continuously finds himself seen in that more real way, and he hates it over and over when someone's actually going to try to get close to him. It's not the kind of attention that he's really combating for throughout the entire novel. The other thing I picked up on this read-through is that this novel has this big sense of like homecoming, this theme of homecoming around it. At least that's something I recognize this time, because in one sense, Motes is going back to his actual hometown, kind of his roots. And in another sense, he's continuously marching toward his spiritual home. And both have this sense of imposition about them. The landscape often has this Edenic imagery around it to get to that spiritual home idea. And you can even find it just on page 1 that I'll read for us here. First line. Hazel Motes sat at a forward angle on the green plush train seat, looking 1 minute at the window as if he might want to jump out of it, the next down the aisle at the end of the other cart. The train was racing through treetops that fell away at intervals and showed the sun standing, there he read, on the edge of the farthest woods. Near, the plowed fields curved and faded, and a few hogs, nosing in their furrows, looked like large spotted stones. So you have that almost like oppressive greenery showing up routinely as Motes kind of travels through this section of Tennessee. And the homecoming spills into the novel's themes about death, life, and salvation. Motes is ultimately this embodiment of death. He literally looks like it. He has a Grim Reaper preacher kind of vibe going on about him. He looks that way. He seems old and bitter, but he's still young, but you forget that because of how bitter and kind of sickly he looks. And he basically also drives something that's described kind of like a hearse. At one point, there's just this ramshackle car that's also dying, basically, but barely going on. And that's interesting to juxtapose him with someone like Enoch, who is constantly kind of seeking transformation and life, and he takes on this holy fool archetype, which I wasn't aware of the first time I read this, but after reading Loris, which I also talked about on this channel, I can kind of see maybe O'Connor was playing with that holy fool idea a little bit. He's very childlike in a lot of stuff that he does. Both of these characters are taking root of something, creating a home, and that in turn determines some of their spiritual home in some way. In addition to the great forces at play that cause Motes to stumble into God, let's say there are others that still take and contort what he does and the truth for other reasons. These forces prevalent throughout Wise Blood, I would say, are commerce, greed, urbanization, commercialization, and industrialization. These forces end up painting this fictional Tennessee town to be a more challenging backdrop to the conversion and the conquest that Motes wants to do. He doesn't really anticipate all these other forces coming into play. There's perhaps some foreshadowing in the first chapter, which I love. At the beginning of this, where Motes claims he knows this black man on the train, but the black man claims he's not who Motes says he is, and there's this back and forth, because Motes is very determined to prove him wrong. So you already kind of have interesting tension developed there, and this anticipation that Motes has going into what he thinks is some kind of like podunk setting. The other thing is that O'Connor might be a little bit critical of street preaching here in an interesting way. The culture of spectacle is always there at every turn. Motes can only get people's attention if he is as wild and as strange as the movies that they are leaving as he sets up shop in front of this movie theater. You can see that juxtaposition that O'Connor wants to establish between these sites of spectacle, the theater and the street, which is which, and how do they kind of match the same energy in a way. These interactions also show how the pure abstraction of his ideas and the disassociation that Motes has with the world causes his message to be borderline incomprehensible to most people around him, let alone us, the reader. He appears as a fool. He's bloated with intellectualism. They even acknowledge, without his $10 ideas, that if you run from the truth to claim it as truth, you're only giving more truth and power to the thing that you're running from. Let's have an example of that at one point as Motes is trying to interact with these people. "What church you belong to, you boy there?" Hayes asked, pointing at the tallest boy in the red satin lumberjacket. The boy giggled. "You then," he said impatiently, pointing to the next one. "What church you belong to?" "Church of Christ," the boy said in a falsetto to hide the truth. "Church of Christ," Hayes repeated. "Well, I preach to church without Christ. I'm member and preacher to that church where the blind don't see and the lame don't walk and what's dead stays that way. Ask me about that church and I'll tell you it's a church that the blood of Jesus don't fool with redemption." "He's a preacher," one of the women said. "Let's go." "Listen, you people, I'm going to take the truth with me wherever I go," Hayes called. "I'm going to preach it to whoever will listen at whatever place. I'm going to preach that there was no fall because there was nothing to fall from, and no redemption because there was no fall, and no judgment because there wasn't one in the first two. Nothing matters but that Jesus was a liar." Oh, this follow-up as he's trying to kind of leave this debacle that he runs into. "What do you do?" she asked. She was a tall, bony woman resembling the mop she carried upside down. He said he was a preacher. The woman looked at him thoroughly, and then she looked behind him at the car. "What church?" she asked. He said, "The church without Christ." "Protestant?" she asked suspiciously. "Or something foreign?" He said, "No, ma'am, it was Protestant." All of this comes to a head in a devastating, dark, somewhat morbidly humorous manner that really I think only Flannery O'Connor could have crafted. Despite Motes' constant resolve throughout to situate women as tools of pleasure and purity, there's like a lot of Madonna horror complex stuff going on in this one. He's basically forced to have a relationship with a woman that imposes his capacity for possible goodness onto him, which, as you could guess or not, he's constantly avoiding. He has to play house, he has to be served, he also has to be a servant. And despite having this imposed on him this whole time, he's trying to reject it, he has these amazing feats of aestheticism that he goes through. It's rivaled by monks and saints, yet it's this guy who is constantly trying to be just not that. He's ultimately being forced to turn into the form of a holy fool that he scoffs at Enoch throughout the whole novel. His faith in allegedly nothing is put on full display by the time the novel is reaching a closing. He fulfills what Hawks set out to do in earnest. He actually blinds himself with lime salt, which makes the irony of Motes' death all the more devastating and kind of morbidly fulfilling for the narrative. I'll try to, if you're trying to avoid the spoilers, put a timestamp here. I'm kind of bad about remembering that. Hopefully I do. Just check and make sure that I do that. If not, just try to jump ahead where you think I'm done talking about this. In the end, as he stumbles off and is dying in this ditch, Motes is taken in by the sort of institution removed from any religious influence that he arguably would want to create, and kills him. He's literally in this sort of coffin constructed in the back of a police car, and he's closed in by this cold, secular vehicle that's delivering divine judgment to him. Let's look at just a little bit of that language there. All right, and because they thought he was running away for rent, this is where it picks up here. The policemen say, "You got to pay your rent first," the policeman said. "Every bit of it." The other, perceiving he was conscious, hit him over the head with his new billy. "We don't want to have no trouble with him," he said. "You take his feet." He died in the squad car, but they didn't notice and took him on to the landlady. She had put him on her bed, and when she had pushed them out the door, she locked it behind them and drew up a straight chair and sat down close to his face where she could talk to him. "Well, Mr. Motes," she said, "I see you've come home." Again, there's that sense of homecoming in a very morbid way toward the end of the novel here that you can see. And still despite all this, and it trickles into that last part there, Motes is still given this glimmer of light. God's light is constantly trying to reach him all the way down to the last minute, and the crazy thing is that Motes recognizes that. And the novel, with that ambiguity, remains ambiguous into what exactly Motes does with that light at the very last bit of his existence. It is excellent, excellent writing. So good. So, does Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor get a toast of excellence? It does. You already know, I've been just saying it's one of my all-time favorites. I love it so much. It's a killer novel around really just faith and truth, and I think the power of truth despite anything that tries to set it up to keep it away from us. If you're interested in getting into Southern Gothic literature, this is definitely your gateway drug. If you're interested in more thought-provoking, highly well-executed novels around themes of spirituality and Christianity, please seek this out. It is perfect for that. And I think really, if you're just looking for damn good literature, you have to read Flannery O'Connor. To me, she was the GOAT. Nothing has usurped her place as my favorite writer of all time yet. And rereading Wise Blood was just a testament as to why I continuously put her out there and recommend her as a writer that can really enrich your life from any kind of angle that you're approaching her. She's just very enriching, and I think that has a lot to say about her relationship with Jesus and how she felt very compelled to share that in a unique way that I think touches people in many ways that we often let slip aside. She is able to accomplish that like no one else I've encountered. So yeah, cheers to Flannery O'Connor's Wise Blood. One of the best novels you can possibly read. Please seek it out. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. Did you get something totally different from Wise Blood? I could see how you could. It's deeply layered. Let me know what your experience is with the novel below, and maybe if they have something that I might enjoy based off your knowledge of me liking this, please give me some recommendations too. I would love to kind of keep going down this path. If you like long form book reviews like this with some analysis, please consider looking at what else I have on the channel. I also have some book list here. If you also like video essays around cultural products and cultural analysis, mainly movies is what I do, I have plenty of those on the channel as well. I'm very interested in this idea of post-secularism at the current moment. If you like this video, please give it a like. It can help reach others that also might like it. If you didn't like this video, let me know that as well. Anything helps me out. And with that, again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in our next exploration.